Je voudrais remercier la présence d'Elvanov, qui est la présidente à la Chambre des Affaires étrangères, qui d'ailleurs, si j'ai bon souvenir, lors de notre premier colloque, tout au début du Conseil, vous étiez présente également. Hein. Voilà, alors cet après-midi, donc, comme on avait dit, on va travailler en deux temps. On va d'abord prendre un moment pour écouter Alison Holder, ici à ma droite, qui va donc nous parler de ce principe de l'indice de genre dans les ODD, donc qui est vraiment un nouvel indicateur qui a été proposé par rapport justement au suivi des questions de genre au sein des ODD. Vous savez qu'il y a l'objectif du développement durable numéro 5 qui est spécifique par rapport aux questions de genre, mais le genre doit normalement être aussi une transversale dans l'ensemble des objectifs du développement durable, et donc c'est important d'avoir des indicateurs qui puissent mesurer l'évolution non seulement par rapport à l'ODD 5 mais aussi par rapport à l'ensemble des objectifs. Alors Alison Holder, elle est directrice de Equal Measures, excusez-moi, et elle va d'ailleurs nous le présenter. Elle a étudié, elle a beaucoup de connaissances sur les questions de développement, puisqu'elle a étudié dans l'Université internationale sur l'International Development Studies à Londres, à la School Economics. Elle a aussi beaucoup travaillé, bien sûr, sur les questions des droits humains, des droits des femmes, à travers tout son travail sur les ODD et ce qu'elle va nous présenter maintenant, donc, sur ces indicateurs qu'elle va nous proposer. Je ne vais pas être plus longue, je lui donne la parole, parce qu'après, nous devons partir en atelier vers 30-35, allez, jusqu'à 25, 30, comme ça on peut avoir des questions.
Okay.
Yes?
Oui.
Okay.
Oui, c'est bon, merci beaucoup. OK, je parle en anglais, excusez-moi. So I am Alison Holder, Director of Equal Measures 2030. And just going to see how to change the slides, sorry. Or someone can change for me.
Ici, oui,
Ah bon? Oui, OK. Yes. Okay, so I'm going to tell you some more about Equal Measures 2030 very briefly. Mostly we're going to focus on the findings of the new SDG Gender Index, where we can measure countries on 51 different gender equality issues. But to give you a sense of equal measures, we're going to try and play a short video, if it works, which doesn't always happen in presentations. Let's see. Thank you.
There is immense power in data. Good data in the hands of advocates can ignite change. By connecting data and action, we envisage a world where gender equality is achieved and every girl and woman counts and is counted. Ambition must now be matched by action. This is why Equal Measures 2030 was formed. This unique partnership led by civil society and the private sector united their strengths to achieve collective impact for girls and women. We work with girls and women's movements and gender equality champions to use data to fuel progress. So together, we can ensure governments deliver on their promises for gender equality by 2030. We are Equal Measures 2030.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying to switch the slides here. Non, ça ne marche pas. Pardon.
Non, ça fonctionne pas.
No. Et non.
It is always the technology that fails in the presentations. Okay, wait.
It is the battery that fails in the presentation.
Okay. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So we go, sort of. Okay.
Sort of.
So I won't spend too long describing equal measures. The video, I hope, gave some sense that this is a partnership. So you'll see it's several global organizations, including Plan International and other recognized groups. We have KPMG representing the private sector, and we have women's feminist networks from Africa, Asia, and Latin America. So it's a really mixed and interesting group, and that's been core to the vision of equal measures since the beginning, that we need to work across sectors and with different actors in order to achieve scale, change at scale. But no? Okay. So we describe our work in 3 different areas. The first is we provide data analysis and tools, and that's mostly what we're going to talk about in the presentation today. But really important is that we learned very early on when we started Equal Measures 2030 that making an index or providing data or doing research is never enough if you want to see that follow through to policy change. It's absolutely crucial to work with policymakers, but we see our audience especially being women-led organizations and movements who we see very much at the forefront of change and campaigning in their countries, but who we hear often don't feel comfortable using data, or they don't trust data, or it's not necessarily the first thing that they would use when they're making their advocacy and campaigning plans. Now it has a mind of its own. I don't know what's happening. So I'll just keep talking and we'll see if we can get the right slides. So we work very closely with girls and women's organizations, and the middle area of our work is we build capacity to help those groups use data. We've got partners in 7 countries at the moment. They've all run data for advocacy workshops that help their networks of girls and women understand what data exists, how do you use it, how do you present it effectively, how do you visualize data. And then we carry that through to supporting our local partners on their advocacy strategies. So we work very closely with them to understand the changes that they are trying to make in their context, what laws are they trying to change, policies, budget decisions, and we help them think about ways that they can use the equal measures data, but also other data that exists locally within their country or even their county. So this is our model. I think it's important that the research is not a standalone product, but something that we work very hard to carry right through to change. Okay, so saying that, let's dig into this new data and see what it's telling us. The SDG Gender Index was launched in June of this year at the Women Deliver conference. We describe it as a tool that's by advocates for advocates. So before we launched the index, we spent a lot of time talking to gender equality champions from across sectors to know, what do you want to measure? What do you want to track progress on? What do you wonder about when it comes to knowing what countries are doing on gender equality? We measure 51 issues across 14 of the SDGs, and in the introduction you mentioned gender equality is about much more than SDG 5. Pretty much every single one of the SDGs has components that are dependent on gender equality, and so the interlinkages across the SDGs are crucial. And in that graphic you can see for each of the SDGs that we measure the number of issues within that goal. So SDG 5, for example, has more than some of the other SDGs. Okay, so the findings of the index this year, this gives you the overall picture. Countries are scored out of 100 on gender equality overall, and the closer it is to dark green, the higher the score, so the more gender equal that country. And this, as an overview picture, I mean, it's pretty obvious here that in our index, gender equality is correlated to some extent, to a fairly large extent, with income. And that's because we are measuring the ability of a country to fulfill women's rights. So for us, it depends largely on whether countries are able to provide public services. If there's no basic access to water and sanitation, that has a huge impact on girls and women in particular. And so there is that correlation where richer countries tend to do better. But that's definitely not the full story. In our report, we talk about a number of levels that dig below that top story. So there are countries that are doing more, that are doing better on gender equality than you might predict given the income level of that country. And there are countries who are doing a lot less than actually you would think given how wealthy the country is. So it's not a perfect correlation. There's countries, and that's where I think the more interesting stories are. And also really crucially, and this is as we dig into the data, you can see this a bit more, is that there is no one country, first of all, that has a score of 100, that has a perfect score on gender equality in our index. Every country has more to do. And there is no one country that is a leader on every single one of the issues, or even in the top 10. So even a country that does very well on the index overall will have problem spots that need more work. And that won't surprise anybody that works on women's rights. But I think it's interesting when the data shows the things that we feel and observe and see. So one of the findings we led with when we launched the index in June is that 1.4 billion, and that's 40%, of the world's girls and women live in countries that get a very poor score on gender equality. I think that's a big challenge for a country like Belgium and every country that has partner countries that they care about. If we went back to the map, you would see that a lot of the countries that are really struggling on our gender index are also those that are facing conflict and fragility. Again, not surprising that those countries are ones that are struggling more than others to fulfill the full spectrum of women's rights. Okay, so this picture shows, I know the letters are small, but don't worry too much about that. This picture shows that overall, if you look at the data across all the countries, which are the SDGs that we're further ahead or further behind on when you think of the gender equality dimensions of those goals? So it's clear we have a lot of work to do on all of the goals. If the pink circle at the end is reaching the full targets as we're measuring them, there's more to do on every one of the goals. But we can see that some of them are particularly far behind. So at the bottom, you can see the global average score on the index overall. And above that, you can see the global average score on SDG 17. So SDG 17 is the furthest behind on average. This is really worrying for me. SDG 17, in the way that we've measured it, includes some crucial components related to countries' tax revenue, related to their public spending on social protection, related to the openness of budgeting processes, gender statistics and availability of those. So if we're seeing countries very far behind on that goal, which is absolutely crucial to allocating resources and understanding what's happening across the rest of the picture, I find that really worrying. We also have really weak progress on SDG 13 on climate, on industry and innovation, and really worryingly for us, of course, is SDG 5 is one of those that's furthest behind. More positive, possibly, from this picture is that those that are further ahead, so looking at health and nutrition, nutrition and hunger, health, education, water and sanitation, those are issues that I've observed and I think all have. There's been a lot of international attention, coordination, funding, major efforts over the last 20 years to make progress on girls' education, for example, on maternal mortality, and it feels like we're seeing that in this picture. So it gives me hope that when the international community comes together to address issues, we can see progress. So all of the index data is available on our Gender Advocates Data Hub. It's data.em2030.org. It's a work in progress. It's going to keep getting better, so keep visiting over the months. We're improving it all the time. But you can really do a lot to compare the data and to dig into the countries that you're most concerned about. So you won't be able to see the words on here, but it's just to show the point. This is Senegal. and to compare Senegal with the regional average. So the bubbles, if they're pink, it means that Senegal is underperforming the region on that issue. So you can see on SDG 1, on SDG 4, education, they're doing worse than the average in sub-Saharan Africa, and on several issues, they're doing better. And I think it's interesting because Senegal is a country overall in the index, in the whole mix of countries, doesn't do that well, but you can see actually that within the sub-Saharan African region, they're actually outperforming the regional average on several issues. So I wanted to highlight the next few slides on issues that we're going to be addressing within this group this afternoon. So we're going into breakout sessions to dive into certain issues. So what does the index tell us about some of those issues that we're going to be discussing this afternoon? So this picture, again, it comes from our data hub. Don't worry if you can't read the words. The point is that this is a data infographic about education. And what it does is it breaks down the components of the education goal in our index. So what are these things? The first cluster of bubbles there, that shows girls who are over age in primary school. So that reflects girls who maybe start school late or have to repeat grades. It's kind of an indicator of learning. So what we can see in that first column, actually the bubbles are a lot towards the top. That means that by and large, countries are doing okay on whether girls are over age for primary school. And in this visualization, there's a purple bubble which shows you Senegal. So if you cared about Senegal, you could see where they fit in the mix of bubbles there. But as we move over, the next issue in this part of our index is 4B, which is, let me just see here, it's girls' completion of secondary school. So what you can see is on that cluster, the bubbles are spread a lot further down. There are a lot of countries who do not have high rates of girls finishing secondary school. So we're solving problems in the primary school sphere, but when we move into looking at secondary school, we're seeing countries are not performing as well. And as we move over to the other issues, it's women who aren't in education, employment, or training at all. And on the far right, it's women's literacy. So if we see some good clustering of results in the first on primary school, we see some real areas of concern as we move over into whether girls are continuing to upper secondary, continuing on into work, and having real literacy rates. So you can use this to look at where any country you're interested in falls in that picture. The other thing that we can do with the data, and we did a special exercise with Plan International for International Day of the Girl, is to look at the data for certain groups. So we pulled out 6 of the issues that are in our index that pertain specifically to girls, the girls' life stage. And you can play with this data on the Data Hub. So we looked again at girls' secondary school completion here. You can look at how does it interact with how countries do on the index overall. And in those little bubbles on the right, what that shows you is for each of those regions, what are the secondary school completion rates? And it's sub-Saharan Africa is the region on the far, far right. You can see lots of red and orange bubbles clustered to the bottom. That means that as a region, sub-Saharan Africa is struggling more than the others on girls' secondary school completion. And then another issue that we're going to be talking about this afternoon is violence. And this is an issue we struggled to cover well in our index. So we don't have any globally comparable data about the prevalence of gender-based violence. So we've had to try and understand the issue in different ways. And this, what this graph shows is the green bars show the percentage of women who, if you ask them, do they feel safe when they walk at night in their neighborhood? That's the percentage who say they feel unsafe. So at the far right, you're seeing in Venezuela, more than 80% of women say that they feel unsafe walking in their neighborhood at night. And on the far left, the global average is just under 40%. So that's, I think, showing that even at an average level, approaching half of women say they feel unsafe at night. And this is focusing particularly on Latin America and the Caribbean, where both homicide of women and perceptions of feeling unsafe are very, very high. So this is the final kind of issue that I wanted to delve into in the data, and this looks at employment. And this particularly looks at what our goal, SDG 8, and these two images show Middle East and North Africa in particular. And one of the things that we can see here, the graph on the left, again, you can't see the words, but the point of that is that the taller those bars, the bigger those bars on the graph, the more open the legal environment is for women to work. And the smaller those bars, the more laws there are that are preventing women from working and preventing women from having any equality in the workplace. So not surprisingly, we can see Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Yemen, Iraq to the right of that chart having very, very restricted laws for women's employment. Again, you know, not surprising for people that work in this area, but good to see the data bearing that out. And on the right, we can see huge differences in the rates at which women make digital payments. So a crucial way of engaging in the economy. And we're seeing in Morocco, just 8% of women say that they've made or received a digital payment in the last year. This is a really interesting issue because it doesn't show here, but Kenya, for example, has better rates of women using digital banking than 3/4 of the world's country, including quite wealthy countries. So once you dig in, I think the whole point is the one map at the beginning, yes, it shows an overall score, but most important is to dig into the issues because that's where you find the more interesting stories. And then the final, I know another one of the issues you're discussing this afternoon is the transition towards local and sustainable food systems. And this is one of the issues we did not cover well in our index because of lack of data. So my final point is on the still prevalence of data gaps, particularly gender data gaps, that have really prevented us from doing as much as we would have wanted with this index. And SDG 1, the poverty goal, and the hunger goal are ones we really struggled to get the data. So we wanted to know about food insecurity disaggregated by sex. We wanted to know about whether women had land tenure and did they actually have documentation to protect that. We wanted to know what was the average income of small-scale food producers, and we wanted to know that by sex, and none of that information could we use at the scale across 129 countries. So I think it's just to make the point on this issue and many others, we have really struggled with the data, so there needs to continue to be more push for better data on these issues. So hopefully that gives you at least just a sense of what the SDG Gender Index can provide in terms of analysis. It's a tool, it's going to keep getting better all the time, and we're really interested to hear your feedback or questions or how we can help you use this data in your work. Thank you.
Vraiment un tout grand merci. Je pense que c'est vraiment un outil intéressant et j'espère qu'on va pouvoir l'utiliser. Peut-être une ou deux réactions. Je suis un peu désolée d'être sur le temps, mais après il y a les ateliers, mais je voudrais peut-être prendre une ou deux réactions. Je sais pas. Oui?
En français?
Sandrine.
Ou...
Ah oui,
oui, c'est moi. Oui, vous avez parlé qu'il y avait un manque de données pour la thématique des violences. Et c'était quelles données exactement qui manquent? Est-ce que c'était parce que c'est...
Oups. Oh. Pardon.
Est-ce que c'est parce qu'il manque de données désagrégées?
En français, mais je pense que c'est possible pour moi.
Sinon, c'est changé.
Non, c'est changer le anglais, c'est possible ou pas pour toi?
Oui.
C'est le numéro...
I'll do it in English.
In English?
Yeah.
Oui, c'est possible? Oui, okay.
So you said that there was a gap in data for violence. What is exactly the gap about? Is it, of course, because violence cases are not reported? Is it broader than that, things that we might not know that there's a gap? Thank you.
Yeah, good question. It's one of the issues when people ask me, which issues did you not feel that you covered well in the index? And violence is one of the ones. Unpaid care is another one. I feel we didn't do enough. We struggled too much with the data. So on violence, we really don't have even the basic thing, which is a good assessment across this number of countries of the prevalence rate. So how many women and girls face violence of different kinds, intimate partner violence, other kinds of domestic violence. We don't actually have even basic comparable data about that. And so in some countries, there's really important work going on to measure violence, but it's not at the scale that you can have data that is comparable across 129 countries. So the kinds of things we used in the index to sort of get at the issue was the one I showed, which is whether women say they feel unsafe. And there's another indicator, which is about how acceptable do women think it is for a man to beat his wife. So the question will ask women, is it okay for a man to beat his wife, if she doesn't cook dinner on time? And then that will give you a sense of how acceptable is violence in that society. So those are the kind of data points that we had that we were able to use, but it doesn't ask the really simple question, which is how many women and girls are subjected to this kind of violence. And the other thing is there's, if you take it through what you mentioned, we don't know what percentage, how that compares to how many cases are reported, and we then don't know what does that mean for how many cases are actually prosecuted, or so there's a whole chain of data that's missing around violence, and I think there's really great work going on in research to get better at measuring these issues. It's just at the moment it's not happening at the scale to be able to be used for a tool like this.
Bonjour, merci beaucoup pour cette présentation extrêmement intéressante. Donc c'est Agnès Bertrand du Monde selon les
Agnès,
femmes.
tu peux parler en anglais,
Yeah,
s'il te
I can.
plaît,
Okay.
merci.
No problem. Yeah, thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. My name is Agnès Bertrand. I'm from Le Monde Selon les Femmes, World According to Women, which is a Belgian NGO working on gender and development. The tool you presented is extremely interesting, but sorry for the naivety of my question. Is, well, for instance, when you say about access to digital payments, you gave us data regarding women. So, of course, 97% of women in Israel had access to digital payment. When you say in Morocco, it's only 8%. But I guess it also can be very well explained because of the paucity of the access to digital payments in general. So the question is well, I'm going to go and have a look at your website, but do you have gender disaggregated data which can explain the level of inequalities also between men and women? Because I would be very interested to know, for instance, in Morocco, where you don't have to have the answer right now, but how many men have access to digital payments? You see what I mean?
Yes, completely see what you mean. And it's a really interesting, for each of the issues that we measured in the index, we had to ask ourselves, what's more important with this issue? Is it the level? So is it the percentage of women, or is it the level of women compared to men? And it's something that we can continue to change. For that data point, you would be able to easily see the level of men. So we measured only women. And it's interesting because, as I say, in Kenya, that has levels of digital payments that are far beyond that of many more economically developed countries. So in that case, it doesn't seem to be so tied only to internet access. So it's very interesting to understand that. So what we do show in our index is what the data source is. So if you were interested to go to see, okay, so we can see they pulled the data for women, but I want to go to the original source and see the data for men, you would be able to find the original source and do that. And yes, so for each of the issues we measured, we had to decide, is it the levels at which women have access to this particular service, for example, or do we want to compare whether their comparison to men? And in that case, we chose just to take women, but the data will be available at the original source, certainly. It's a good question. I'd be interested to see from Morocco, too.
Yeah, thank you very much.